Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gaurvadi Pachani Nivasesa Sunyavadi Paskachade Satarani Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunatham Vitam Stam Sajivam Sadvaitam Sadvadutam Pradijana Sahita Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitam Scha Vanchakapachuvischa Kripa Sindhi Patitanam Bhavanevyo Vaishnavevyo Namo Namo. So I think what I'm supposed to focus on today is my own personal stories with Srila Prabhupada, yes? That's the idea?
Yeah.
Okay. So my first meeting with Srila Prabhupada was not actually a meeting with Srila Prabhupada. It sort of was and it wasn't. So my middle sister lived very close. She lived like 2 blocks from here. At that time, my parents and I were living in New Jersey. But I would come in like 2 or 3 times a week to visit her and her family. And I would wander around this part of the city by myself. You know, like, okay, can I just take a walk? And Mr. Alan Coleman had made a recording of Srila Prabhupada chanting Hare Krishna called The Happening Album. And he had a store. You had to go downstairs to get to it, called the Krishna Store. So whenever I would walk around, so this is when I was like 12, I would walk into that store and I would listen to this recording of Srila Prabhupada chanting Hare Krishna. So my first connection with Srila Prabhupada was hearing him chanting in this recording in Alan Coleman's store. And then a couple years later, I bought the record album, the Radha Krishna Temple album that George Harrison produced with, of course, the Govinda on that we hear every day. That's what I heard on the radio. That's why I bought the album. And because I had that album, one of the other students in my high school brought me to the temple in New York. And so that was my first contact with the Hare Krishna movement. So I ended up joining the movement, not here in New York, although I grew up in Manhattan. I ended up joining the temple in Chicago. That's a long story that if I told that, I wouldn't get to my Prabhupada stories in the next half an hour. So I joined there. I joined there on the day that Kishore Kishori were installed. So last year I was there for the 50th anniversary of their installation, which was also, again, I had stayed in the temple before that, but as far as the day that I moved in the ashram and became an official card-carrying member of the Hare Krishna movement, that was that day when the deities were installed. And then I met my husband there, got married there a few months later after I moved in. And that December I got initiated by Srila Prabhupada through the mail. I hadn't met him yet. In fact, I hadn't even asked to get initiated. My husband was already second initiated, and the temple president said, well, I guess she should be too. And so he wrote to Prabhupada, would you accept her? And then the temple president came to me and said, oh, Prabhupada's accepted you as his disciple. And I'm like, oh, okay. So at that time I was 18. So the first time that I met Srila Prabhupada, my husband had met Prabhupada before he met me, before my husband met me. So then the summer of 1974, was the first Rath Yatra in Chicago. And so Srila Prabhupada had come for that Rath Yatra. So that was the first time that I saw him in person. And I was very excited, you know, oh wow, this is going to be different. It's going to be like mystical. I was really wanting something like super mystical, right? So the first time that I saw Prabhupada was when he walked in the temple room to greet the deities and give Bhagavatam class. So he's sitting on the Vyasa-san. So at this point I was 19. I was pregnant with our first child. And I was fanning Prabhupada with a peacock feather fan. My remembrance was that I fanned him for the whole class. So I don't know if I actually fanned him for the whole class, but that's how I remember it. But I was as far, or as close as I am right now to this photograph of Prabhupada on this chair. And I was on Prabhupada's left side just like this, and I was standing and fanning him. Which interests me sometimes because there are places, even today, that don't allow women to offer like Guru Puja to Srila Prabhupada. And here I was a 19-year-old. Anyway, Hare Krishna. So I'm fanning Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada on the Vyasa-san was generally very formal. He was there as the Acharya, and he was very, very formal. So I remember in his class he was talking about how everyone, you can all understand me at New York speed, yes? I'm speaking at my normal, when I go to other parts of the world, I slow down. And then I realize I'm at my normal speed. I feel very at home here. So Prabhupada was talking about how we all want to see God, but we can't even see a little part of God. And he said what he often says, how, you know, your father dies and you're crying, my father is gone, my father is gone, but the body of your father is there. He said, so that means you never saw your father. You only saw the body of your father. He said, so if you can't see a little part of God, how can you say, I want to see God? And then he was saying how each of us is a controller, but when you go to the controller of the controller of the controller of the controller, you will come to Krishna. All right, so I'm there waiting for my mystical experience, and it's not happening. I'm not having any mystical experience, although I was having one without knowing at the time that I was having one, because what I realized was, wow, this is exactly 100% identical to hearing Srila Prabhupada speak on a recording. And again, at that time, I didn't code that as a mystical experience. In retrospect, like, that was actually a pretty mystical experience. I felt like I was listening to a recording. And that gave me great peace, great solace. I realized Srila Prabhupada's been here long before he physically came, and he'll be here long after he physically goes. That listening to his recordings, I mean, at that time I wasn't thinking about the book specifically because I was hearing him, but I was thinking, listening to his recordings, I'm with him. And I still like to listen to a Prabhupada class. Any day that I'm in a place where I won't disturb other people with the sound, I like to listen to a Srila Prabhupada class, so it's almost every day. So I was very gladdened and happy about that. Wow. I didn't actually need Srila Prabhupada to be physically present for him to be present. Then there was a part of me, though, that was grievously disappointed because it wasn't the kind of mystical experience that I had wanted. And I thought, but I wanted something different. I wanted something different than listening on a recording. So I was simultaneously very happy and very disappointed. So my father was visiting the temple that day. My father had been supportive of my joining the Hare Krishna movement from the very first moment. So I had stayed in the Chicago temple for 2 weeks before I actually moved in, when I was 17. And when I came home and I said, so at the end of this semester, I'm dropping out of college and I'm going to go move into a Hare Krishna ashram. Which nobody knew what the Hare Krishnas were in those days. It was just like, what? And my father immediately, he just said, I'm so glad you're looking for God. I wish you'd do it in our own faith, but that's not what's important. What's important is that you're looking for God. And my mother just had a total meltdown, and it took my mother 10 years to accept that, okay, my daughter's actually joined the Hare Krishna movement. But my father was very supportive from day one, and he had donated he ran a big food business. Maybe some of you are familiar with the Manischewitz company, so that's my family, and he was the CEO of the company. So he donated some big cookers, like, gargantuan, the kind of things, if any of you have been on the Polish tour, that kind of thing. I mean, not quite as big as some of those on the Polish tour, but big. So he had that shipped by train to Chicago to help with the Rath Yatra, and he had come to see Srila Prabhupada and come to the Rath Yatra. So we went into Srila Prabhupada's room that morning, like 10, 11 o'clock or so, and there's a video you can see where Srila Prabhupada's speaking to a reporter in that room, and the video ends right after Brahmananda introduces my father. So it's like, Srila Prabhupada, here's Mr. Manischewitz, and then the video cuts out. So it's just that. Actually, some people took some photographs of my father with Srila Prabhupada, and something got in the newspaper, and my father said, tell people not to do that, it's affecting my business. And because of that, I don't have photographs. So we didn't think, let's take photographs and keep them for ourselves. Anyway, Hare Krishna. So Srila Prabhupada had a low asan, I mean very low, like what you were reading, at a low desk. So he generally sat on the floor. He had a low asan. In front of that was a desk. But Prabhupada was sitting in front of there on a cushion. So first we're hearing Prabhupada talking to the reporter. And the reporter is saying, why did your disciples come and pick you up in a fancy car from the airport? And Prabhupada said, I knew you were envious, and that's why I'm not sitting on my seat. And it wasn't even that nice of a seat. I mean, it was a pretty ordinary seat. So then my father got introduced to Srila Prabhupada. And at first, Prabhupada thought that my husband was my father's son. So it took him a while. Oh, that's your daughter. And my father said, yes, I only have 3 daughters. Prabhupada says, oh, 3 daughters. And then Prabhupada started telling the story of Hiranyakashipu and Prahlad. And Ravindra Prabhu has a similar experience where Srila Prabhupada was calling his father a materialistic, demoniac, foolish person, and his father was just saying, yeah, that's fine. And this is also what happened. I mean, Prabhupada was effectively saying that here I had become a devotee. I mean, I'm still not a devotee, but that I'd become a devotee and that my father was a materialist. And my father was just happy. He wasn't offended at all. And I mean, part of that was his own piety and his own good character. But part of that is that you always knew that Srila Prabhupada was keeping your own benefit in mind. He wasn't attacking. He wasn't trying to overlord anybody. So then my father, he ran this international food business. And he said, so I'm in the food business, and I noticed that you're very eager to give people your food, even people who don't know anything about your philosophy. So why is that? Now, Prabhupada was sitting on this cushion in the front. He was sitting, there's not really enough room on this chair to do this. He was sitting like this. So he's leaning back. I'm sure you've seen some photographs, Prabhupada, like this. And his dhoti was up around his leg. So you could see all of his right leg from the knee down, and you could see his right foot. You could see his left foot also. And he was just like a completely different mood than what I had seen him on the Vyasa that morning. Completely different. He was really just there, not as the Acharya, but as just the person Prabhupada. And Prabhupada says, yes. He said, yes, so do you believe in infection? And my father says, yes. And he said, well, just like if you eat the food of an infected person, you will get their disease. So if you eat the food that Krishna's eaten, you will be infected with Krishna's disease. And everybody laughed. Yeah. So we were very much enjoying that. And then, I don't remember in which order he asked, but you know how in India there are many Hindu temples where only Hindus can come in. And the reason they do that is to prevent tourists. They want people who are serious. Like I was just at the library the other day meeting one of my childhood friends, and they have these research rooms where they have like 2 tours a day where you can go in for 5 minutes. But otherwise they only we said, how do you just go in the room to study? And they said, well, you have to show the gatekeeper that in your bag that you have stuff to study, that you're not coming just as a tourist, that you're coming to study. Right? Or like, I don't know if any of you have visited other religious places, like I visited the Grand Mosque, and there's certain places you can go as a tourist, and other places you can only go if you're actually going to pray. Or like the whole city of Mecca, you can't even get in unless you're a Muslim. You can't get into the city. So I think my father was feeling like that. Like, am I allowed to come to the temple when I'm not a Krishna devotee? And so he said, I'm coming to the temple, but I have my own religion. I'm Jewish. Is that all right if I come? But he says, yes. He says, there are many religions. He said, just like we are in Chicago, and so many planes are going to Chicago. He said, but they have to know that they're going to Chicago. Otherwise, what is the meaning of many planes? He said, so if your religion is teaching you to know God and to love Him, then it is a real religion. And Srila Prabhupada's attitude like that is a huge reason why I joined the Hare Krishna movement. And I sometimes run into devotees who have a sectarian attitude, and I'm like, that's not Srila Prabhupada's attitude. Actually, just the last few days of listening to Prabhupada's lectures, he's talking about Savaipam Samparo Dharma, but Yato Bhaktir Hoksajaya, Ahoitukia Pratyata Yadyatma Suprasidati. The Paro Dharma, he's saying the Bhagavatam is not sectarian. What is religion? Religion, it brings you to know God and to love Him. Religion is what brings you full satisfaction. If your religion is giving you that, it's bona fide. If it's not, it's not. He said, we're not interested in Hindu, Christian, Muslim. That's not the point. The point is, are you coming to love God? So he said that, and then my father said, well, I'm really coming just to see my daughter and son-in-law. I'm not coming to see Krishna. My father obviously felt some anxiety about this. And so again, Prabhupada's sitting like this, and he's like, yes. He said, they are loving Krishna. Right? And I'm sitting there thinking, I don't know if I love Krishna. He said, so they are loving Krishna and you are loving them. So 2 things equal to the same thing are equal to each other. It's funny, when I tell this story with translation, I always wonder if the translator can translate a mathematical formula, like Prabhupada using mathematics to preach Krishna consciousness. Now that thing that Prabhupada said has affected and inspired me and challenged me all of these years. Do I love Krishna? If people love me, are they getting Krishna? You know, and sometimes the only way of dealing with people, like, how can I help give this person Krishna? Well, I can love Krishna and have them love me. I mean, sometimes it's just like that. Okay, how can I have this person think that I'm a good person and care about me, and then I'm loving Krishna, and that will be the same as they're loving Krishna. I remember also when I was sitting there, so as I said, I was pregnant. I think I was like 5 months pregnant. And, you know, Prabhupada that morning had talked about, you know, you can't see the little part of God. And I was thinking, can Prabhupada see us? Can Prabhupada see, like, the soul? Or does he just see the body? Can he see my child? You know, I never got an answer to that, but I was thinking like that. So altogether, we were in Prabhupada's room there about maybe 20, 30 minutes, something like that. And when we walked out of the room, my father looked at me and he said, now I know why you've come to this movement. He said, this is a genuine holy man. And it's funny, it wasn't until after my father passed away that I thought about, maybe I should have asked him exactly why he said that. You know, what inspired him in that brief encounter with Srila Prabhupada to reach that conclusion. I know for myself what really struck me about that first meeting was, first of all, that then I did get that special that you're not really going to get listening to a recording. You know, so I got both. I got both, seeing that Prabhupada always had been there and he always would be there and I could always access him, and then I got that personal interaction that you really could only get in his personal presence. So that was very satisfying, how Krishna fulfilled that desire of mine. But also I just saw that Prabhupada was very authentic. He was childlike in the sense that young children are transparent. They haven't yet learned how to put on the various masks and personas and try to impress people, you know, very, very young children. And so Prabhupada had that kind of innocence and transparency and authenticity. What you saw was what you got. I just read a little thing in Madhavananda puts out these Bindu magazines every Ekadasi, and I was just looking at what was in there, and it was a story of how a devotee went into, like, opened the door to go into Prabhupada's room to give him something, and Srila Prabhupada was deeply, deeply meditating on his japa. And this devotee concluded that it wasn't just that with Prabhupada what you see is what you get, that actually Prabhupada was more than what you would see. That Prabhupada's depth of spirituality and his depth of meditation, his depth of realization was far more than you would ever see it in a public situation, whereas for most people it's less. Most people, the show they put on publicly is more than what they are privately. So at the end of that year, we moved to New York, and that was the Henry Street Temple, which I had visited when I was 14. So we actually moved there. We moved across the street. At that time, our child was a baby. And Srila Prabhupada visited there, I believe it was in March 1975. He was just there for a few days. So then we went to the airport to greet him, and there were devotees from all over had come. So, and those of you who are relatively young, so airports in those days were completely different than what you experience now. Completely. They were much more like a train station. I mean, really, if you think about, like, you know, a train station, it was much more like that. Anybody could go anywhere. You could go onto the plane and get your friend situated in their seat and then leave the plane, like you can do on a train. Anybody could go anywhere in the airport. There was no security. Another thing to keep in mind is that people could smoke anywhere in those days. So people were smoking anywhere. You keep that in mind for a later story, which hopefully people have time to get to. So anyway, the devotees had, like, taken over a huge portion of the airport and even set up a Vyasasan for Srila Prabhupada. Like, there's no way you could do that today. Absolutely no way. And, you know, we were having this big kirtan, and then there were these reporters there. And sometimes this is in the Veda base. It's like labeled as being in Philadelphia, but it's not. It's in New York, and the audio says it was in New York. It was Prabhupada when he was greeted in New York. This is when one of the reporters said, you know, why do your members dress like this? And Prabhupada said, that's so you will know that. He said, you can be Krishna conscious in any dress, in your dress. He said, but this is so you will know that we are Hare Krishna people. By the way, you can tell I'm there because my baby's crying in that recording. So the child that's crying in that recording, that's my kid. When another reporter asked Srila Prabhupada, when did you have your first realization of God? And he asked this about 4 or 5 times. And Prabhupada kept saying, that I cannot say from the age. And the reporter, but what age, Swamiji? You know, I have always been, I cannot. But what age did you have? You kept pushing, like, and Prabhupada said, what age? Maybe 4 years old. And so we saw Srila Prabhupada at the temple. Of course, he was giving the lectures there. And we also had another meeting with my father there, which Prabhupada was talking about how useless it is to read the newspapers. Right? Although in Nectar Devotion, he said there's no harm in keeping up with ordinary news. And Prabhupada definitely knew, like, headline news. I had another story, which I'm not going to tell tonight, about how I got in trouble for not knowing what was going on in the world. It's a whole different story. And I decided I should always at least read headlines. But anyway, Prabhupada was talking about how, you know, it's just the same news over and over again. And some famous person like Gandhi is saying, no, there's no one as Krishna living ever. You know, they're just quoting famous people who are just saying rubbish things. And Prabhupada talked to my father a lot, I remember at that time, about vegetarianism. When Srila Prabhupada left New York, and Mahamaya tells this story, and somehow her memory of it is a little different from mine. So when Prabhupada was leaving New York, so this was in the middle of the day and not as many people went to the airport to see him off. I remember my husband was at work that day. He worked for Con Edison. And there were a whole bunch of different cars that went to the airport, and one car had big trash bags full of flower petals. So again, the airports were like a train station. They were like Grand Central Station or Port Authority. They weren't like today's airports. So we went into the airport, and the devotees were throwing flower petals from the door to the VIP lounge. So there was a whole trail of flower petals for Srila Prabhupada to walk on. So Prabhupada's walking on these flower petals, and the VIP lounge was under construction, so there was no one else there. And Srila Prabhupada sat on a sofa, and I sat down to his left, like right next to the arm of the sofa. And I had my baby, who was just a few months old, so I was holding him in my lap. And there were maybe 15, at most 20 devotees there. And a lot of those were devotees who had joined in the early days in New York that Prabhupada knew very intimately. So like Kirtananda was there, Prabhupada said, where is Hari Griva, how is he doing? And Shilavati was there, and he asked her, you know, how are your sons, what's going on? So he was asking them, and I was thinking, I wish I had that kind of relationship with Srila Prabhupada. You know, I wish I had that Prabhupada knew me like that and could ask me about my family and things like that. And then the devotees had brought Radha Govinda's big silver trays, and I mean big. I don't know if they still have them or not, but they were like this big silver trays. They must have assembled this at the airport. So they had piled up one with fruit that it looked like a pyramid of cut fruit. So the trays here, and the pyramid was like up to here. And they bring it in front of Srila Prabhupada, and he takes a piece of watermelon from the top, and he just pops in his mouth, and he says, distribute. And so everybody wanted a piece of watermelon, yeah. And then they had another tray of milk sweets. So this devotee, Satyabhama from Gita Nagari, she had actually stayed in our apartment for a few nights so she could see Srila Prabhupada from Gita Nagari. And so she had also been making, Prabhupada had taught her how to make sandesh, and so she later taught me how to cook. Anyway, so she'd make milk sweets and other people, and there was again like this pyramid of milk sweets on another huge silver tray, and they brought that to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada didn't take any of them. He just said, distribute. And then nobody was interested, even though it was like burfi and sandesh. Prabhupada didn't take it, we didn't want it. So then there's some altercation going on like the back of the room with our GBC, Rupanuga, and some airport official. And Prabhupada said, what is happening? And someone, I think it was Jayadvaita, said, oh, Prabhupada, they want us to clean up the flowers. So, there's no polite way to say this, but in those days of the Hare Krishna movement, we didn't care what anybody thought about us. They were all hogs, dogs, camels, and asses, and we really just didn't care. We didn't have like a PR department. We didn't have an ISKCON communication. You know, it was just, wasn't on our radar at all, like how we appeared to the public. So it's like, we're not going to pick up the flower. I don't think we did. I don't think we ever picked up the flower. And then someone else brought up the fact that there were cigarette butts all over the airport, which there were. people would smoke and then they just throw their cigarette on the floor. And someone said, well, Prabhupada, they're not asking those people to pick them up. They're not complaining about the cigarettes. And then Prabhupada laughed. And he said how his godbrothers had gone to Burma. And in Burma they had this dish called liquid dog, where they would take dead dogs and they would bury them underground in some kind of container until the flesh liquefied for over a few years, and then they would take it up, and this was their big drink. And he said that they liked the smell of this, aged, fermented liquid dog. And when the devotees went there and were cooking with ghee, they would say the smell was, have you smelled ghee? Everybody smelled ghee? And they would smell the ghee and they'd say, how horrible. Prabhupada was telling this story. And Prabhupada was laughing about it. And then he said, let us have kirtan. And one of the devotees said, oh, that will be worse than flowers, Prabhupada. Prabhupada said, then we will have kirtan softly. So Prabhupada took out his pair of cartels. He had a little bag, and he played it like on the side, quietly. And this devotee, Jai Sachinandana, he had a mridanga. So he was singing the Guru Vastika and Guru Vandana. So Guru Vastika we sing every morning for Mangalarti, Guru Vandana we sing for Guru Puja. So he was singing those prayers. Now remember, I'm sitting right next to Srila. I mean, I'm like this, very close. Not more than like 2 feet away. And I'm noted, Prabhupada's also responding in the kirtan. And of course I always knew this, but it was like, wow, Srila Prabhupada's chanting to his guru. Because automatically when we were singing those songs, we were singing them to Prabhupada. And Prabhupada's also singing, oh yeah, he's singing to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. And I don't know, I felt this really deep, like I had this connection with the whole parampara, like I was connected with this whole chain of gurus and this whole chain of saints and rishis by sitting next to Srila Prabhupada. That was a very mystical experience. And then as I was sitting next to Prabhupada, hearing him chant, I was not there anymore. I wasn't in the airport, and I wasn't in New York, and I was in a completely different space. I really felt like I'd been transferred to the spiritual world, and there was no time, and there was no space. Everything was just gone. I was just in the kirtan. The kirtan was in me, and it was just an absolutely amazing experience. And I don't know how much time elapsed. I really don't know. I mean, as a guess, 20 minutes? I just don't know. But at a certain point, I kind of came out of that space back into the VIP lounge. And all of a sudden, I thought, oh, Prabhupada has to go to the plane. He's not going to stay in this room. We're going to start moving to the plane. And I haven't changed my baby's diaper for a while. I probably should do that, or it's going to start leaking through his clothes. I'm going to have a problem, so I probably should change him before we get up and start walking. So I kind of partially removed my attention from the kirtan. And I was still chanting, but I wasn't really absorbed. And I'm going in the diaper bag and like this and taking care of him. And so Prabhupada's, I'm like here. So Prabhupada's facing forward and I'm facing Srila Prabhupada, taking care of my baby. And Prabhupada had his eyes closed. He was just chanting like this. And I'm over here. And as Prabhupada's chanting and I'm taking care of my son, and Prabhupada goes like, he's going like this as he's still chanting, and he very slowly lifts his head. And he slowly turns this way, and then he just like stares at me. And I kind of went. At the time, I interpreted this as, you shouldn't be doing this. You should be absorbed in the kirtan. What are you doing? Your lack of attention is disturbing the kirtan. And I read later in Chaitanya Charitamrita how Lord Chaitanya would have these kirtans, and Srivasa's mother-in-law hid out. She wasn't actually allowed in because she wasn't of the proper mentality, but she hid. And Lord Chaitanya said, there's someone here who shouldn't be there, and they're messing up the ecstasy, and they found her and they threw her out. And I thought, oh yeah, that's what it was like. But as time went on, I've decided that I have no idea, really, that I was projecting something, and I have no idea. And Prabhupada just stared at me for a very, very long time. But I don't know why he did that, and I don't know what he was thinking. But at the time, I felt that I was embarrassed. Anyway, then Prabhupada, after staring at me for a long time, stood up. and started moving toward the gate. So we're going toward the gate, continuing this kirtan. And as we get there, these in the line to get on the plane. And Satyabhama, who was, as I said, she stayed at her house and she'd made the sweets. She had a 3-year-old. And he goes to get in the line and holds Prabhupada's hand. Oh. And Satyabhama's thinking, okay, Prabhupada's going to London. She's thinking he doesn't have a ticket, he doesn't have a passport, he doesn't have anything, how's he going to go to London? And the airport employee starts to move him and said, you have to get out of the line. Prabhupada says, no, he's passenger. And Satyabhama told me years later, she said, I always wondered, should I have just let him go on the plane with Srila Prabhupada? So we only have like 5 minutes left, so I don't think I can tell the rest of my stories. I can tell a little bit. So we were then living in New York. We were living in the Brooklyn Temple. And Prabhupada came to Philadelphia in 1975 for the Rath Yatra in Philadelphia. So I was at that time going to get second initiation. I was going to get the Gayatri mantras from Srila Prabhupada. And any of us who were going to get initiated were going to stay overnight in Philadelphia. Everyone else was just going for the Rath Yatra. And I remember when we left, it was raining, and we had an umbrella that one of the, I don't know what you call it, spokes kind of, was bent. Yeah? And so we had left it in the shoe room to go to see the deities, and when we went out to the in Brooklyn, when we went out to the shoe room, it was gone. This is the old Brooklyn Temple, Henry Street Temple. It was gone. It's like, somebody took our umbrella, why could somebody take our umbrella? It's a broken umbrella. Why would they take it? We were kind of irritated about it. When we got to Philadelphia, that was the umbrella that the devotees were using for Srila Prabhupada. You could tell it was an umbrella. I mean, there was no mistaking that it was our umbrella. And then we were happy. We were like, okay, it's being used for Srila Prabhupada. And that whole Rath Yatra was in the rain. Actually, one of those children's books is about a Rath Yatra where it starts raining, and that was actually inspired by that time in Philadelphia. So that was the Philadelphia, the Rath Yatra was one day, and then the next day, Prabhupada was going to do the initiation, so we had stayed overnight. So the initiation lecture, Prabhupada was talking, he was reading from the 6th canto of the Bhagavatam, which hadn't been printed yet. And it was the story of Ajamila. So he would have, a disciple was reading from the manuscript. And the disciple read the verse and said, so Ajamila called out 3 times, Narayana, Narayana, Narayana. And Prabhupada said, what is this 3 times? He said, I did not say 3 times. He said, once is sufficient. Narayana. So he was talking in the class about how you can't cheat Krishna, how Hiranyakashipu tried to cheat Krishna. Or, Madhusudana tried to tie up Krishna. He said, but you can't cheat Krishna. He said, if you try to cheat Krishna, then he will cheat you. So that was what I remember from that lecture. And my father was also there. Did I say that? That he also came? Yeah, so he was also there. And so then most of the devotees, they were getting first initiation, and other people had chosen the names. So people would come up, and the other person would say, this is the name. And with one of them, they said the name, and Prabhupada was, no, that's not it. You should give them this name. I mean, with one of those cases, the name they had chosen, Prabhupada said,
anybody got changed? I lost my job. Anybody got changed? I lost my job. Anybody got changed?
So they said some name, and Prabhupada said, this is not a proper name. He said, this means one who carries a heavy load. He said it should be Bubrit, one who carries the planets on his head. And I met him many, many years later. Oh, what's your name? Bubrit. I said, are you the Bubrit? He said. So after this happened like 3 or 4 times, Prabhupada said, who has chosen these names? Prabhupada was not pleased with that. We were staying at the home, to stay overnight in Philadelphia, we were staying at the home of an Indian family where the wife had become a devotee, the husband was not a devotee, and the 2 teenage sons were not devotee. And for 3 years, she'd been waking up at 3 in the morning and offering Mangalarti and chanting 16 rounds and so forth. And she had asked the temple authorities if she could get initiated, and they refused. They said, your husband's not a devotee, you're living outside, we're not going to initiate you. So she went directly to Srila Prabhupada when Prabhupada came, and Prabhupada accepted her. So she got initiated that day. I met them 20 years later. The husband had eventually become a devotee. I met them 20 years later in Vrindavan. So I remember Prabhupada initiated her. And then Prabhupada had just come from Chicago, where he'd had the sannyasis recite the Gayatri mantras to the initiates. He hadn't done it personally. And my assumption is that he thought that that either nobody was getting the Gayatri mantras or that someone else was going to give them. Because we were told, we'll just wait after the yajna and Prabhupada will see you. And so we waited. The yajna was in the morning. And we waited and we waited. And while we were waiting, my husband, my father, my son, and I got to see Srila Prabhupada in his rooms. That was probably about 11 o'clock in the morning. So we go in, and there is a recording of this in the database, although there are some things that aren't right. So my father had bought Srila Prabhupada a fruit basket. You know those gift baskets that are wrapped up with cellophane? So big fruit basket, and he'd made sure there were no nuts or candy in it, only fruit. And he gave it to Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada said, oh, so many fruits. In the database it says so many questions, but that's not what Prabhupada said. And that would make no sense. And he said, oh, so many fruits. And my father said, yes, all fruits. And then Prabhupada said, I have seen you before. And he said, yes, once in Chicago and once in New York. So then we sat. My father was just beaming. He had been on the morning walk with Srila Prabhupada that morning, which he said was the highlight of his whole life, to go on that walk. And my father, he was just like glowing, effulgent, beaming. He was so happy. And Prabhupada offered him a chair. He said, no, I can sit on the floor. He was probably about as old then as I am now. And then he gave Prabhupada a check for life membership. And the devotee, I think it was Brahmananda, said, oh, Mr. Manasheva is becoming a life member. Which was a nice thing that he gave the money to Prabhupada, but it ended up being a problem because none of the temples wanted to give him his books. Because they said, we didn't get the money. So it took me a long time to make sure that he got his books and that he got his Bhakti Guides and all that kind of thing. But anyway, so he gave Prabhupada a check to be life member, and we gave Prabhupada some dakshin. And then my father's introducing, this is my daughter, my son-in-law, and my sleeping grandson. And Prabhupada said, oh, make him active like you. And then my father said, is it possible to be reborn in the same body? And my father was definitely thinking about like spiritual rebirth because he felt his whole life had changed from Krishna consciousness. By that time, he actually was a practicing devotee. He was chanting like about 2 rounds a day, and he was offering all of his food and so forth. Unfortunately, he didn't keep that up his whole life, but that's another story. Although he did have a very auspicious departure. And Prabhupada said, yes, he said, we are being reborn at every moment. He said, imperceptibly, the body is changing at every moment. And when we finished the conversation with Srila Prabhupada and we offered obeisances, Prabhupada said, good father, good daughter. And that's something that I've really kept with me because I really feel that it's Srila Prabhupada that's my father. And I certainly have materially I had a very, very good father. I was very blessed. But spiritually I have the best father. And can I also be a good daughter? Just because I have a good father, I still have to be a good daughter. So I guess I should stop there. It's 7:02. Yes? Okay.
One more pastime, Mataji?
It's up to the
smoking.
Well, that was with the cigarette butts. You already got that. You already got that. I could tell you what happened later when I got Gayatri Mantra.
Oh, please.
Later that same day, and then I just won't tell you the final New York time that I saw Prabhupada in '76. So we'll skip that one for now. So we saw Prabhupada, and then my father came back to New Jersey where he lived. He left, so it was just my husband and my son and I. And the other people waiting to get second initiation. There were 9 of us. Do any of you know Bhakti Vinod in New York? African American? Anyway, he got initiated. And Pankaj Nangri, who recently left his body, also African American, recently left his body in Vrindavan. He also got second initiation. Anyway, so we're waiting and we're waiting and we're waiting and we're waiting and we're waiting, and they wouldn't let me do any service in the temple with the baby because I'm considered dirty with the baby and stuff. I just had him in a backpack and I was just chanting and chanting and waiting and chanting, and I counted 64 rounds and then I stopped counting and I was just chanting and all day, just waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting, and it got to be 6 o'clock at night. And our GBC saw all of us like kind of milling around. He said, what are you all doing here? Why haven't you gone back to New York? We said, well, we're waiting for Prabhupada to give us the mantras. And he said, oh, he didn't give you the mantras? We're like, no. So then he goes to see Srila Prabhupada, and Prabhupada had his bedroom, and then he had his like meeting room where he would meet with people. They called it like the darshan room. And Prabhupada had already finished meeting with people for the day. He'd already gone back in his bedroom. But when they told Prabhupada we had been waiting since the morning yajna, he said, oh, bring them in. So, I really feel very fortunate that I got to hear the mantras directly from Srila Prabhupada. So then, I don't know if I should say this, but I'm going to say this. I haven't said other things like this, but I'm going to say this. Anyway, so the 9 of us go we're in the darshan room waiting to be called in to see Srila Prabhupada. So it's my husband, myself, and a baby, right? And everybody else was a man. I was the only woman. And the men who were like managing who was going to see Srila Prabhupada, they said, you have to go last because you're a woman. And then they said, but if your baby makes any noise, you have to leave. I said, I can't leave. I have to get the mantras from Prabhupada. Now, if they were sensible and they didn't want him to make noise, they would have had me go in first, right? That would have been intelligent. So anyway, that's the only thing I'm going to say about the treatment of women in tonight's class. So, I have to wait till all the other men go. And I remember Pankaj Nagri went in, and then he came back out again. Prabhupada had sent him out immediately because he was so nervous that he couldn't figure out how to count on his fingers. And Prabhupada said, you have to go out and someone else has to show you, and unless you can figure out how to count on your fingers, I'm not going to give you the mantras. And so he's there, and some devotees are showing him, and he's going like this, 1, 2. Anyway, finally he figured it out. Anyway, back in. So yeah, we were the last ones to go in. And which was incredibly stupid. But anyway, so we were the last ones to go in. And so my husband's holding the baby. And this was the first time that we had met Prabhupada when our son was awake. When we'd met him in well, if you count when he was crying at the airport, but then we weren't like personally in Prabhupada's room. But the first time we were just like personally, directly, just us and Srila Prabhupada, that he wasn't sleeping. Because when we saw him in the New York Temple in 75, he was sleeping then. And when we saw him that morning, he was been sleeping. So this time he was awake. And he was like 7 months old, I guess. And Prabhupada goes like this. All his attention was on our child, and he was looking at him. Prabhupada's going like this. And he said, oh, he's laughing. He said, he's very intelligent, which he is. He's extremely intelligent. He said, and he's very fortunate. And I was thinking, yeah, he's going to hear the Gayatri mantras from Srila Prabhupada. He's very fortunate. So, somebody yesterday was talking to me about humility and about like how, they're a natural leader, but they don't want to take a leadership position because then they won't be humble. So I had all these kind of ideas about humility as well, and I thought, well, I better make sure that I'm really humble around Srila Prabhupada. So I better make sure I don't say the mantras perfectly because then he might think that I'm arrogant. So let me purposely mess them up so that he'll think that I'm humble. Hare Krishna. So that's what I did, on the last line, I purposely fumbled it. And Prabhupada looked at me just like, I get his look like, what are you doing? And I was like, oops. So Prabhupada restated the mantra, and then I said it right. And then Prabhupada just looked at my husband, he said, you already have it? And he said, yes. He said, then you show her how to chant. Well, I guess this is kind of sort of another thing I'm going to say about women. Oh, well, what to do. So at that time, the mentality was that if you were married with a child, you were like a hopeless case. Like, forget it, you'd never be Krishna conscious sort of thing. And the only people who were really going to be Krishna conscious were the single renounced people who were out selling books. And so in the New York Temple, because we'd moved there as a married couple with a child, and he was a very young child, so people were just, the classes, everything was like, if you weren't out on the street selling books, you were never going to go back to Godhead, and it was heavy. And I would often come back from classes just crying. And I had some people say, well, now that you're a mother, you're not allowed to distribute books anymore. All you can do is be a wife and a mother, and you can't be a preacher anymore, that's it. And then I had other people say things to me like, well, just leave your kid at home alone. We're talking about little baby. Just leave him home alone for a few hours and go out and sell books. And I'm like, neither of those made any sense to me. And so I went to Prabhupada. It's the only thing I personally asked Srila Prabhupada. I said, Srila Prabhupada, I want to preach and I want to please you, but it's very difficult to go out on book distribution with a child. And Prabhupada's reaction, the mood I definitely got from Srila Prabhupada was, this is really a silly question. And in retrospect, of all of the times that I was with Srila Prabhupada personally and all the opportunities I had to ask Srila Prabhupada a question, this is the only thing I asked him. I really want to preach, I want to distribute books, but I have a child, and so it's difficult to go out. That's all I asked him. Folks, don't do this. Like, Don't do that. If you have an opportunity to ask your spiritual master, ask an advanced devotee questions, ask them some question about advancing in Krishna consciousness. I mean, you can ask the practical ones too, but if you're only going to ask like 1 or 2 questions at all for your whole life, so this is one of those, like, why did I do that? And then Prabhupada said, well, you must take care so you may not go out. But he said that as if that's obvious. His tone of voice was, that's obvious. Well, you must take care so you may not go out. He didn't say, you cannot go out. And actually a week later, my husband and I started going out with our baby on our back, switching who carried him in the backpack and who was distributing books. So that's all but my story from 76, New York. And I hope you've been, I don't tell my Prabhupada stories very often. So thank you very much.